So, you're curious about scuba diving. Maybe you've seen those incredible underwater documentaries and thought, I want to do that. But there's always that little voice in the back of your head, right? The one asking, is it, safe? Well, today we're going to answer that question, and we're going to do it with some serious data. Let's dive in.
I mean, who hasn't? There's just something so magical about that idea. The thought of just floating, weightless, in this totally silent, vibrant world, surrounded by fish. It's on a ton of bucket lists for a very good reason.
Okay, but for every one of those beautiful daydreams, there's that nagging question about safety. And it's a fair question. We're talking about a completely alien environment. So the real trick is separating the Hollywood movie fear from the actual statistical fact.
And to get to that fact, we're turning to this amazing study from the Diving and Hyperbaric Medicine Journal. They looked at decades of data, giving us what is probably the clearest picture we've ever had on the topic. Now, to be super clear, they weren't looking at just any kind of diving. They focused specifically on something called the Discover Scuba Diving program. You might have seen this on vacation. It's that one-time introductory experience where a total beginner gets to try scuba, but they're under the direct, constant supervision of a pro.
And when I say they looked at data, I mean they looked at a lot of data. The researchers analyzed information from more than 7 million. Yeah, you heard that right. 7 million of these introductory dives. That huge number, recorded over 28 years, means we can be pretty confident in what they found. Okay, and here's where the story gets really interesting. The researchers split that 28-year time frame right down the middle, creating two distinct eras. And what they discovered when they compared them, well, it completely changes how we should think about the risk.
This, right here, is the headline, the main event. In that early era, the calculated fatality rate was about 2.5 per 100,000 divers. But look at the more recent late era. It plummeted to just 0.87. That's not just a small dip. The risk was slashed by more than half.
And this chart just makes it so obvious. You don't need to be a statistician to see that difference. It's a massive, massive change.
And you might be thinking, well, maybe that was just a fluke. Nope. This chart, pulled straight from the study, shows their analysis, and that tiny p-value basically means this is not a random coincidence. In the world of science, this is about as close as you get to a sure thing. This drop is real.
So, of course, the big question is, why? What on earth happened to make the calculated risk fall off a cliff like that? Did diving gear suddenly get way better? The answer is kind of like a detective story.
The researchers landed on two main suspects. The biggest one, by far, is what you could call the registration factor, basically a paperwork problem. The second, smaller factor is the safety factor, the idea that, yeah, diving probably did get a little bit safer over time, too. And this quote right here is the smoking gun for that registration factor. Think about this. Back in 2002, only about a fifth of dive shops were actually reporting all their introductory divers. So the number of total dives, the denominator in the equation, was way, way too low. And that made the risk rate look artificially and incorrectly high. So what fixed it? Honestly, better tech. The whole system went from these clunky mail-in paper forms to a simple online process. Suddenly, it was easy to register divers, so everybody started doing it. And with a much more accurate count of how many people were actually diving, the true, much lower risk was finally revealed. So let's circle back to that new, more accurate number, 0.87. It's obviously a lot lower, which is great, but what does a number like that even mean in the real world? Let's try to put it in perspective. This is the number to remember, 0.87 fatalities for every 100,000 people who try it. The study's authors are pretty clear that this is the most accurate estimate we've ever had for this kind of supervised scuba experience. And let's be honest, that is an incredibly low number.
And just to give it a little more context, here's how it stacks up against some other scuba mortality studies from around the world. As you can see, that 0.87 rate is really, really low in comparison. Now, the researchers are very careful to point out you can't compare these apples to apples because they all use different methods. But still, it strongly suggests that this kind of supervised one-time dive has a very, very low risk profile.
So, we've gone through all the data. We've solved the mystery of the dropping risk rate. What is the final takeaway? What's the one thing you should remember from all this? It really just boils down to this. The risk of trying scuba diving in a supervised program is, according to the best data out there, very low. That scary higher number from the old days, it was mostly a data entry problem, not a massive safety crisis. The real rate, 0.87 per 100,000,
means that anyone thinking about taking the plunge can now make a truly informed decision based on fact, not fear.
And really, that's what it all comes back to, isn't it? Now that we have this clear data, it's not about being afraid of some big unknown danger anymore. Instead, it becomes a much more personal calculation. How do you weigh the incredible thrill of adventure against a risk that is very, very small, but now finally understood? That's a question every potential explorer gets to answer for themselves.